The rain came down in sheets, hammering against the cracked pavement, turning the narrow alley into a river of mud and shadows. Emily Parker tightened her coat and pulled the hood closer around her face, clutching the umbrella that was doing little to keep her dry. It was past midnight, and she should have been home an hour ago. But the cafe where she worked had stayed open late for a private event, and the buses had stopped running. Her boots splashed through puddles as she hurried down the dark street, until she heard it. A low, muffled groan. Emily froze. Her breath fogged in the cold night air as she turned slowly toward the sound. At first, she saw nothing but the glimmer of street lights reflecting off wet concrete. Then, in the corner where the alley met the main road, she saw him. A man. He was slumped against the brick wall, soaking wet, his head bowed forward, dark hair plastered to his forehead. Torn clothes clung to his lean frame, his hands scraped and bruised. He looked broken. Emily hesitated, her heart pounding. This city wasn't safe. People warned her constantly, don't stop for strangers at night. Call the police. Keep walking. But something about him kept her rooted to the spot. Sir? She called softly, stepping closer. Are you okay? No answer. She swallowed hard, crouching down in front of him despite the icy water soaking through her jeans. Hey, she whispered, reaching out carefully to shake his shoulder. Can you hear me? At her touch, his head lifted slowly, and Emily's breath caught. Even beneath the bruises and dirt, his face was striking. Sharp cheekbones, strong jawline, lips pale from the cold. But it was his eyes that startled her most, dark, stormy gray, and filled with something raw, confusion, pain, and exhaustion all tangled together. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a ragged sound came out. Hospital, she said quickly, pulling out her phone. I'm calling an ambulance. No. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but firm. He grabbed her wrist weakly, his hand icy cold. No hospital. Emily frowned, startled. You need help. You could be seriously hurt. No hospital, he repeated, his gaze locking on hers with surprising strength despite his condition. Something about his tone made her hesitate. All right, she murmured softly, slipping her phone back into her pocket. Then, let me help you, okay? Getting him home wasn't easy. He was taller than her by at least a head, his frame solid beneath the soaked clothes, but somehow, he managed to lean on her as she half walked, half dragged him to her small apartment just a few blocks away. By the time they reached her door, Emily's arms ached and her lungs burned, but she didn't stop until she had him inside. She guided him carefully to the worn-out couch, setting him down gently. You're freezing, she muttered, hurrying to grab towels and a blanket. Wait here, I'll get you something warm. When she came back with a steaming mug of tea, he was sitting upright, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor as though trying to piece his mind back together. Here, she said softly, holding the mug out to him. Drink this. It'll help. He hesitated for a moment, then accepted it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. She felt the chill in his skin, like he'd been standing in the rain for hours. Do you have a name? She asked gently, sitting on the coffee table across from him. He looked at her blankly, his jaw tightening. Then, after a long pause, he whispered, I don't know. Emily blinked. You don't know? He rubbed his temple, wincing as though his head throbbed. I can't remember. Nothing. Just pain. Her heart twisted. He wasn't just injured, he was lost. Okay, she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of questions in her head. That's okay, we'll figure this out later. For now, just rest. She gave him dry clothes, an old sweatshirt and sweatpants that belonged to her late brother, and turned away politely as he changed. When he emerged from the bathroom, his wet hair curling slightly at the ends, he looked less like a stranger and more like someone caught between two worlds, one he couldn't remember, and one he didn't belong to. Emily smiled faintly. We can't keep calling you, hey, you, she said softly. How about, Lucas? It's the name of the street where I found you. He stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Lucas, he repeated, almost testing the sound. Lucas it is, she said with a small smile. You can stay here until we figure things out. His gaze locked on hers, something unreadable flickering in those stormy gray eyes. Why are you helping me? He asked finally, his voice low, almost suspicious. Emily hesitated, surprised by the question. Because you needed it, she said simply. Isn't that enough? For a long moment, he just stared at her, like he was searching her face for some hidden motive, some reason she'd drag a half-conscious stranger out of the rain. Finally, he looked away, his jaw tightening. No one's ever helped me, without wanting something back. Emily's chest ached at the quiet bitterness in his voice, but she didn't press him. Get some rest, Lucas, she whispered softly, pulling the blanket over him as he lay back on the couch. She turned off the lights and stepped into her tiny bedroom, leaving him in the soft glow of the lamp. But as she closed the door, she couldn't shake the feeling there was so much more to this man than she could see. Lucas lay awake long after she left the room, staring at the ceiling, his mind a blur of fragments. Flashes of marble floors, a screaming woman, a gunshot, blood on his hands, then nothing. He clenched his fists beneath the blanket, his breathing unsteady. Whoever he was, whatever he'd been running from, he had a sinking feeling it was coming for him. And now, because of her kindness, Emily Parker might be dragged right into it. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the tiny apartment the next morning. Emily stood in the kitchen, hair tied in a messy bun, wearing an oversized hoodie and faded jeans. She was used to mornings like this, quiet, lonely, simple. But today, the air felt different. On the couch, Lucas stirred beneath the blanket, a soft groan escaping his lips. She turned, watching as his brows furrowed, his breathing uneven, like he was caught in a nightmare he couldn't escape. Lucas, she called gently, stepping closer. His body tensed suddenly. Run, he shouted hoarsely, jerking upright, chest heaving, beads of sweat clinging to his forehead. Emily froze for a moment, startled, before kneeling beside him. Hey, it's okay. You're safe, she whispered, placing a hand on his arm. He blinked rapidly, looking around the unfamiliar room, confusion flashing in those stormy gray eyes before recognition set in. Emily, he murmured, his voice low and rough. You were having a nightmare, she said softly. He ran a hand through his damp hair, exhaling shakily. I keep seeing pieces, flashes, but they don't make sense. Emily hesitated, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of him. Do you remember anything new? Marble floors, a big house, someone screaming. Then, he stopped suddenly, his jaw tightening, as if finishing the memory would cause pain. She bit her lip, studying him carefully. Whoever Lucas was, his past wasn't ordinary, and maybe, just maybe, it was dangerous. Eat first, she said finally, forcing a smile and handing him a plate of toast and scrambled eggs. Memories or not, your body needs energy. Lucas stared at the plate like it was foreign. Slowly, he picked up the fork, his movements strangely precise, elegant even, nothing like a man who had been living on the streets. Emily noticed. You handle that fork like you've done this at fancy dinners your whole life, she teased lightly, trying to keep the mood easy. Lucas froze for a moment, then smirked faintly. Maybe I have. Or maybe I just learn fast. She hummed, unconvinced but deciding not to push him further. After breakfast, Emily headed to her shift at the cafe, but Lucas insisted on helping her clean before she left. You don't have to, she said, folding her apron. I want to, he replied simply, taking the dishcloth from her hand. His voice was calm, steady, but there was something deeper in his tone, something unspoken. She caught herself watching him as he moved around her tiny kitchen, sleeves rolled up, the muscles in his forearms flexing slightly as he scrubbed the counter. She quickly turned away, cheeks warming. Get it together, Emily. Later that afternoon, Emily came back from the cafe exhausted. She unlocked the door, expecting to find Lucas asleep on the couch again, but instead, she froze in the doorway. Lucas was on the floor, doing push-ups, not sloppy, lazy ones either. Perfectly controlled, military style, his form flawless. She blinked. You do realize people recovering from head injuries aren't supposed to train like Navy SEALs, right? Lucas paused mid-push-up, glancing up at her with a small, lopsided smirk. I guess my body remembers what my mind doesn't. Emily crossed her arms. That doesn't sound suspicious at all. He chuckled softly, standing up and wiping sweat from his forehead with the hem of his borrowed sweatshirt. That night, Emily sat on the couch with her laptop, balancing her budget while Lucas flipped through channels on the tiny TV. Emily, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. She hummed, not looking up. Why did you help me? His voice was soft, but laced with something sharp, suspicion, maybe even disbelief. She looked at him finally, tilting her head. Because you needed it. Isn't that reason enough? Lucas stared at her, his expression unreadable, before looking away. No one's ever helped me without expecting something in return, he said quietly. Emily's chest tightened at his tone, cold, bitter, like life had taught him not to trust anyone. Well, she said gently, maybe that's why you ended up in my alley instead of someone else's. Life decided you needed a little kindness. For the first time since she'd met him, Lucas smiled, small, faint, but real. But later that night, when Emily had gone to bed, Lucas sat awake on the couch, restless. He stared at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly, noticing the faint calluses along his palms, marks of someone trained, someone powerful. And then there were the flashes again. A black car. A man shouting his name. The sting of betrayal. Gunfire. Lucas squeezed his eyes shut, gripping the blanket tightly. Who was he? And why, deep down, did he feel like someone dangerous was looking for him? Just past midnight, Emily's soft footsteps padded out from her room. She found him sitting in the dark, elbows on his knees, lost in thought. Couldn't sleep? She asked quietly. Lucas didn't answer right away, just glanced at her with those stormy eyes that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. Finally, he murmured, I don't know who I am, Emily. But I have this feeling. What feeling? She asked softly, sitting beside him. He turned his head toward her, voice low and rough. Idiographic period, that someone's coming for me. Her breath caught. In that moment, Emily realized something chilling. Taking Lucas in might have been the kindest thing she'd ever done. But it might also be the most dangerous.